Hey Pretty Girl Club, so I wanted to make this video because I have been hearing people obsessing over Meg Thee Stallion's skin tone. So one of you guys emailed me and told me about how people are arguing up and down. They're trying to force her into the dark skin category. You guys already know my opinion on this. We already voted for what we are going to consider light skinned on this channel. We voted for Fenty Shades 390 and above. I do not know what Meg Thee Stallion's Fenty shade is, but in my opinion, I do believe that she is light skinned because the reason that I have an issue with the term brown skinned is because number one, we're all brown, okay? Beige is a shade of brown, look in the dictionary. Tan is a shade of brown. So when I think of the term brown skin, I've always viewed it as a nickname that people call themselves. Like, oh, I'm brown skin. So I don't really care about that part. Like if people use it as a nickname to describe themselves, that's fine. I have personally never heard anyone say, oh yeah, that brown skinned girl over there. No, I personally have never heard anyone say that. And if I have heard people say that on the internet, usually they seem to be talking about someone who's actually dark skinned, who is just kind of the beginning of dark skin. Even when it comes to those women, I'm not sure about like how much they tan or whatever, but I've noticed that with the Meg Thee Stallion thing, people have literally gotten pissed off that she calls herself light skinned. And what people need to understand is that skin tone is subjective. So depending on who you're around, who's looking at you, basically anybody who's lighter than you is going to think you're dark, and anybody who's darker than you is going to think you're light. But the reason that I don't refer to people as brown skinned on this particular YouTube channel is because we talk about colorism on this channel. And when you use the term brown skinned and you call someone like Meg Thee Stallion brown skin, when you know damn well that Meg Thee Stallion benefits from light skin privilege, so much so to the point where she feels confident enough to call herself light-skinned and red bone in her music and in her interviews. She is so confident in her background and her admixture to the point where she literally has talked about her Creole heritage multiple times. And so when you try to make these assumptions, especially when non-light-skinned people, they try to say, oh no, Meg Thee Stallion is the same shade as me. I'm sorry, but it's giving you're trying to approximate yourself to Meg Thee Stallion. And also, what a lot of people won't admit is that you judge people's features, like you judge their facial features and their hair when you take into consideration their skin tone. Meg Thee Stallion, she has a very African American vibe in terms of her music, how she speaks, how she does her lace fronts. She does that heavy like vixen makeup. But if you look at Meg Thee Stallion's natural phenotype with no makeup and her natural hair, if you are telling me that a girl who looks like this is not going to benefit from light skin privilege, you are being absolutely disingenuous. Also, if I'm not mistaken, I believe that Meg Thee Stallion is from the South. I'm not going to say where I currently live, but I have lived in the South, and Meg Thee Stallion would absolutely be considered light skin. I have actually heard people in the South refer to people who are darker than Meg Thee Stallion as light skin. And honestly, if you're policing it, you're pedestalizing it. It's funny because I watched one of Chrissy's YouTube videos not that long ago, and she was doing a live stream about the Nicki Minaj versus Meg Thee Stallion thing, and she was talking about how she's not that big of a fan of Meg Thee Stallion and how she thinks Meg Thee Stallion is weird because she called herself light skin. And it's like, okay, if you're that triggered over somebody being confident enough in their skin tone to refer to themselves that way, what does that tell me about you? This tells me that a lot of people who have a deeper complexion, or maybe they are darker and they like to call themselves brown. Like I said, I don't identity police on this channel, so I don't care if people call themselves brown. But if Megan calls herself light, and if society calls her light, and if she benefits from light skin privilege, to imply that she has the same experience as someone who has a brown skin tone, or like a dark brown skin tone, that's disingenuous. And that's why I only use the terms light skin and dark skin on this channel, because if dark brown skin tones are dark skinned, why would light brown skin tones not be light skinned? Stop pretending that light brown skin tones don't exist. Stop pretending that light brown skin tones do not benefit from light skin privilege. They do. Meg Thee Stallion absolutely has benefited from light skin privilege throughout her life, and most likely throughout her career as well. And again, if you look at Meg Thee Stallion without a tan or like without all that heavy makeup on, she does not look, in my opinion, She does not look like an unambiguous, dark-skinned black woman. I'm sorry, I would not describe her that way. But I want to play a couple of TikToks for you guys so you can see what they had to say about this.
I'm gonna say one more thing about this brown skin conversation, then I'm gonna drop it because, like I said, this conversation is very unproductive. Some of the people who y'all refer to as brown skin benefit from light skin privilege. Other people who y'all refer as brown skin do not have that kind of access. And so when you put things into that perspective, not only is the label brown skin kind of pointless, but it's also damaging in some cases. And it does not help y'all in y'all's argument when y'all bring up words like featureism, because featureism is its own aspect of anti-blackness, completely separated from colorism. Y'all can tell me that they're only the same shade in this picture because of the lighting a million times. All I'm gonna say is there's a bunch of brown skin girlies that no matter how much lighting you put them girls under, who are not gonna share the same skin tone with Beyonce. Another reason why I can't take this brown skin brigade all that seriously is because we're all brown, are we not? Like, we're all different shades of brown. So when y'all say shit like brown skin, it makes me feel like y'all are avoiding something, you know? I deadass feel I can debunk this whole argument with one question, all right? Would Massa have your ass in them fields or in the house? Okay, get back to me. I really am trying to be nice to y'all about this shit, but y'all are holding on for dear life on that half a shade that Meg has over Beyonce. Be fucking for real. Me and Megan are both from Texas, okay? Different parts, but still Texas. I can guarantee y'all that someone who looks like this does not experience life as a brown skin. I don't even have to take my word for it. Megan has lyrics to where she refers to herself as a red bone. Like, why are we even having this discussion right now?
So as you guys saw from those TikToks, there are multiple people online that are taking my side basically, or they have the same viewpoint as me. And the fact that this is even an argument, once again, if you're policing it, you're pedestalizing it. And also, why do you care so much about somebody else's self-perception? Why do you care about how Meg Thee Stallion views herself? Why do you care about her opinion on her own skin tone? Why do you care about the types of privileges she has received in her life? Let's be honest here. If you are confident enough to call yourself light-skinned out loud, most likely you have probably been called light-skinned or treated as a light-skinned person so many times to the point where it has become a part of your identity. So people can argue up and down and say, well, you're not that, you're not light-skinned, or kind of like what they did with Chili, calling her burnt and saying she's too dark and saying she looks like a regular black woman as an insult. And it's like, you can't argue with people's personal experience. You can't argue with how someone navigates through society. So if society views her as light-skinned, I mean, I personally, just because she's darker than me doesn't mean that she can't be light-skinned. I'm not one of those people that has that mindset of, if you're darker than me, you're not light-skinned. Like I said, I have been around people in the South in particular who have called men who are Meg Thee Stallion's color light-skinned. And I've also been around women who have called men who are darker than Meg Thee Stallion light skin. This actually just happened to me recently. I think I talked about it in the Discord where they were referring to this guy. Some girls had a crush on this black guy or whatever. And they were like, oh yeah, the light skin guy. And I was like, who? And I didn't know who they were talking about. And it was this guy who was literally multiple shades darker than Meg Thee Stallion. Skin tone exists on a spectrum, okay? And skin tone is subjective. So just because you want to argue and say, well, she's not light-skinned, she's not light-skinned, you can say that as many times as you want, but you're not going to be able to change Meg Thee Stallion's identity. So just like you couldn't change Chloe Bailey's identity, Chloe Bailey went on that Vogue makeup tutorial and she called herself light. She called herself light-skinned. So these women, whether you think so or not, they are representing the light-skinned phenotype. And they talk about it in their music. They've talked about it in their videos. I saw a Lipstick Alley thread where people also got mad at Chloe Bailey because they were talking about colorism and Chloe Bailey refused to answer for obvious reasons because she's probably never experienced colorism. Actually, I can pretty much guarantee that she's never experienced colorism for being too dark. If anything, she's probably experienced the colorism for being too light. And for those of you who want to argue with the definition of colorism that I use on this channel, I'm using Alice Walker's definition of colorism. If you don't know who Alice Walker is, she is a Pulitzer Prize winning author. She also is the creator of The Color Purple. So if you don't agree with that viewpoint of colorism, this is not the channel for you. But my thing is, have you ever noticed how it's usually unambiguous people who are arguing up and down about who gets to rep being light-skinned and who doesn't? And then for the people who say, oh, well, she could be lying about being light or she could be lying about her Creole heritage. Even if people do lie, still, I don't care. Like, it's their life. If other people want to go around lying, like, I can't control what they do anyway. So if they want to represent my phenotype, or if they like Creoles or whatever and they want to represent that, then they can. But I don't believe Meg Thee Stallion is lying about any of those things, because even when I look at her pictures, just her natural pictures, she doesn't look like a dark-skinned, unambiguous, monoracial black woman to me. That's just my opinion. I can see why she calls herself light. Once again, skin tone is subjective. I don't know what her Fenty shade is, but I'm assuming that without a tan, she's probably like a 390 or something. And that's another thing. A lot of people think that light-skinned people can't tan into being dark-skinned. Well, if you're like a caramel, if you're naturally like a caramel or kind of like the darkest shade of light skin without a tan, then that means, yes, you can tan into being dark-skinned. And also, why does it matter? Why are you so obsessed with who is caramel without a tan and who's not? So in my opinion, Meg Thee Stallion, she appears to be caramel without a tan. So I don't view that as a big deal. Like, I'm not somebody that's going to police it like, oh, you can't be in the club, you can't be in the light skin club. I don't view skin tones that way. So if Meg Thee Stallion has the light skin experience, which she obviously does, which is being thrown in and out of being light skinned, that's a part of the light skin experience. And then number two, if she does not experience the same thing as somebody who has a dark skinned experience, somebody who has a dark brown skin tone, then it's disingenuous to try to replace actual dark brown women with Meg Thee Stallion. That's disingenuous. And then unambiguous black women want to talk about erasure, and it's like, well, you guys are erasing yourselves by trying to pretend like Megan Thee Stallion is at the dark brown spectrum, or like she's dark skinned. And also, if people want to call her brown, I don't really care. I mean, Latin American people have called themselves brown, Indian women have called themselves brown. So just because you guys want to call her brown, that doesn't mean anything. Like, that doesn't mean that she does not benefit from light skin privilege. I absolutely think that she benefits from light skin privilege. Notice how she tends to date unambiguous monoracial dark-skinned black men. She has no problem attracting a ton of guys, but I thought they were so quote unquote colorist. So she's obviously benefiting from light skin privilege. The way that I've always viewed light skinned is, if you have never in your life been called dark skinned, you are very light skinned. That's just my opinion. If you have very rarely been called brown or very rarely been called dark skinned, then you're probably still light skinned, but you're just not white passing. So what annoys me about the unambiguous mono black community is they try to pretend that light brown is not a part of light skinned. And that's because they pedestalize light skin so much that they want to make the category smaller and smaller and smaller. But guess what? You don't get to do that. I'm light skinned. We've got thousands of girls on this channel who are on the light skin spectrum as well, and we have voted for what Fenty shades we consider to be light skin. But on top of that, though, you really can't argue with someone's experience. So if Meg Thee Stallion has the light skin experience, if Chili from TLC has the light skin experience, if both of those women have that experience without a tan, and then they can tan into being dark skinned, then guess what? That's their experience. So just because they break your stereotypes of light skins, just because you stereotype light skins and you think all of us are white passing, just because you think that you have to be Taylor Swift's color to be light skinned, guess what? That's not reality. The world doesn't revolve around you. So there are light skinned people like me who can't necessarily tan into being dark skinned, but guess what? There are some light skinned people who are naturally without a tan the darkest shade of light skin, maybe around Fenty 390. And guess what? They like to go in the sun and they still like to get a tan to be dark skin. And then they get to benefit off of, that ambiguity. They get to have that fluid identity that a lot of unambiguous women do not have, because you're dark skinned all year round. You're experiencing things like probably colorism, texturism, featureism 24/7. And women like Chili, women like Meg Thee Stallion, women who are kind of on the darker end of the light skin spectrum, they get to pick and choose. Do I want to stay light skinned? Do I want to go into being darker? And some women will tan in the music industry so that they can increase their careers, because they want to be relatable to their audience and they want to profit off of unambiguous black women. And they fall for it every time. And then for those of you who accuse celebrities of bleaching and you say, oh, everybody's bleaching, Nicki Minaj, Beyonce, Cardi B, everybody, Rihanna. For those of you who think that everybody is bleaching, regardless of whether or not their skin tone is natural, it's still light skin. So whether they are a bleached light skin, whether they are born light skin, they're still navigating through society as a light-skinned person. If somebody is going to be colorist, they're not going to say, oh, can I see your baby pictures before I decide to be colorist towards you? No, they're still navigating through society with that skin tone. So whether it's natural or not doesn't really matter. What matters is being honest about who wants to represent you. Unambiguous Black women need to stop begging others to be their representation. They are begging Meg Thee Stallion to represent dark-skinned monoracial Black women. She's not doing it. She never has done it. She said herself she is representing light-skinned Black women. She talks about her Creole heritage. She has called herself a red bone multiple times. And that's it, point blank, period. So you can pretend and you can beg Meg Thee Stallion, or you can try to bully Meg Thee Stallion into representing dark-skinned, unambiguous Black women, but she never will. Just like Chloe and Halle Bailey. Chloe came onto Vogue and she said, well, because I'm so light, and then she proceeded to put on her Fenty match, which is Fenty 300. And then she went on to ignore conversations about colorism. Chloe and Halle do not represent dark-skinned Black women. Meg Thee Stallion does not represent dark-skinned, unambiguous Black women. So this is a classic mistake that unambiguous women make all the time, where they're begging light-skinned women to be their representation. They try to bully us into being monoracial, even if we're not. They try to ignore our skin tones, or they try to utilize terms like brown skin, because the term brown skinned is so vague to where you could be describing anything. You could be describing any shade of brown. And so a lot of people will use the term brown skinned in order to blur the lines between light skinned and dark skinned, so that they can throw anybody in and out of that category. Like, I've heard people say Doja Cat is brown skin. I've heard people say Coco Jones is brown skin. So it's like, okay, so Doja Cat and Coco Jones are the same shade? Like, no, this is exactly what I'm talking about. People are trying to blur the lines. They're trying to pretend like light brown is not light skin, but then dark brown is dark skin. And I'm not falling for it. It's intellectually dishonest. Meg Thee Stallion does not represent unambiguous monoracial dark-skinned Black women. I don't know what her Fenty shade is, but without a tan, I definitely would have considered Meg Thee Stallion light-skinned if she were walking down the street just in her natural phenotype. No makeup, no wigs, no weave, no baby hairs, no lace fronts. If I would have seen her walking down the street, that's what I would have thought of her. Clearly, there are millions of other people who have thought that of her, because she was bold enough to put it in multiple songs and to talk about it, and that's how she's representing herself. She's representing for the light skins. And so for me, I don't pedestalize light skin, so I don't really care if other people want to represent it. We've already voted on this channel as Fenty shades 390 and above as being light skin. That's not a hard and fast rule. That's just based on our experiences so far on this channel. But I don't really care. Like, if Chili is caramel without a tan, great. If Meg Thee Stallion is caramel without a tan, great. I have no problem with it. And we also need to break the stereotype that if you're light-skinned, that you can't tan into being dark-skinned. Because there are light-skinned people who are kind of more caramely, and if they stay in the sun for a long time, then yes, they can tan into being dark-skinned. Stop stereotyping us. Stop stereotyping light-skins and assuming that all of us are white passing, or that we have blonde hair and blue eyes, or that we can't tan into the cocoa or chocolatey skin tone range. Some of us can. And clearly, Meg Thee Stallion and Chili are those people. And clearly, they're not afraid of the sun. They're not afraid of being dark. So if anything, you should be glad that they're not like, let me stay out of the sun or whatever. But even if they are, though, they have the choice to do so. Or if they're bleaching, or if people are, becoming Michael Jackson, okay, well, people are doing it. And that's the skin tone that they are navigating through society with. And also for the people who say, well, Meg Thee Stallion, she doesn't receive light skin privilege in her daily life. Well, how do you know that? That's like saying, Taylor Swift doesn't receive a white privilege because I've never seen it. Like, what are you talking about? If you're not living that person's daily experience, you don't know what types of advantages and disadvantages they're experiencing. But some people are so ignorant that they think that the only way to be successful in rap is via light skin. And so they're probably looking at Meg Thee Stallion. I actually think Meg Thee Stallion is one of the top rappers, but some people might think, other rappers are more famous than her who are light skinned. But the way that I view it is, nope, Meg Thee Stallion is on par with all of the other light-skinned girls. She's on par with all of them. I wonder why. In my opinion, if light-skin privilege truly exists to where it makes rappers more famous, then Meg Thee Stallion has it, in my opinion, because she is on the same level as Nicki Minaj or, these women who are not very much lighter than her. And that's another thing. A lot of people feel like if you're not the lightest light skin, then you're not light skinned. Or if you can tan into being dark skinned, then you are not light skinned. But the way that I view it is a suntan is different than how you were born. So some people they identify their skin tone based on what they look like when they have a tan, which is fine. And then there are other people like Chili or like Meg Thee Stallion who tend to identify their skin tone based on how they were born. So how they are without a tan. And that's fine. So you're just mad because they have a fluid skin tone identity. And I've noticed that's something that most unambiguous people obviously wouldn't have because they don't understand because they're dark skinned all year round. Like they don't really they don't experience light skin privilege, because they're dark skinned unambiguous black women. But I would say anybody who can opt in to light skin privilege at any given time, that's absolutely not the average experience of an unambiguous dark skinned black woman. And that is erasure and colorist to pretend like unambiguous dark skinned black women can just wake up and say, okay, I'm just not going to go in the sun today, and then I'm just going to have my light skin privilege back. Unambiguous dark skinned black women can't do that. They're unambiguous and dark skinned every day. So if you want to have an honest conversation about colorism, let's have an honest conversation about colorism. The average unambiguous monoracial dark-skinned black woman does not have the same skin tone as Meg Thee Stallion, hence the terminology, unambiguous dark-skinned. But what do you ladies think? Do you think that it's impossible for a light-skinned person to tan into being dark-skinned? Do you think skin tone is subjective? Because I think skin tone is subjective. So depending on where you're from and like the people you're around, if you're around a lot of black people or around a lot of white people, people are going to view you differently. And so because skin tone is subjective, I don't tend to get upset if other people view themselves differently than how I might view them. Like if somebody calls themselves cinnamon and they're way lighter than cinnamon, I don't get mad or argue. If somebody calls themselves chocolate and I don't see them as chocolate, I don't argue. And then the same thing if somebody calls themselves light-skinned and I don't view them as being that light-skinned or whatever, I don't argue because I don't really care. I do not pedestalize any skin tones. I don't believe that light skin is an exclusive club that we need to go out of our way to exclude people out of. On this channel, to avoid confusion, we voted on Fenty shades 390 and above because that's what the majority of you guys experienced. And also Fenty 390 and above is kind of like a caramely shade and then lighter. I personally think that there are some people who have a natural deep caramel skin tone without a tan and that they can tan into being dark skinned if they stay in the sun. And there are some people who they like that. They like having that fluid skin tone identity. Anyway, what do you ladies think? Let me know in the comment section and I'll talk to you next time. Stay pretty, ladies.